Our summers are getting hotter and drier, especially here in Maryland Zone 7, and a lot of the things that I love to grow just kind of struggle keeping up these days. So today I'm sharing some of my favorite super heat and drought tolerant crops to grow in your garden that really stand up to those 100-degree days. Now, I'm not saying you have to stop growing things that require a lot of water and don't stand up in the heat, but I am saying that you will take a lot of stress out of your gardening life during the summer if you can incorporate some things that stand up really well to the heat and dryness of our summers. So first up, we've got sweet potatoes. Now, sweet potatoes are one of those things that I never really liked, and I kind of convinced myself to like when I started growing them because they are so easy to grow. They're actually tropical plants and they do well in really high heat, unlike the more common potato you may be used to, which is kind of a cooler weather crop. So with your sweet potato vines, those are going to be root vegetables, but the foliage will spread far and wide, unlike traditional potatoes, and it's actually edible. Now, I'm not saying you'll like the taste of it, but it is edible, and if you don't like the taste of it and you let those vines sprawl all over the place, they'll do a really great job of shading out the soil naturally and conserving some of that moisture. Another thing I love about sweet potatoes is you can store them on a shelf for many months. So I store all of my sweet potatoes all winter, and I think this year we got until like June before we finished eating all of the sweet potatoes that I had dug up and thrown in the basement the previous fall. Sweet potatoes are also super easy to start slips from yourself. I'm gonna do a video all about that when I start my slips this year, but really I just saved one or two from my previous year's sweet potatoes I dug up, and I sprout my slips from those. Pole beans are another great thing to consider because they are going to maximize your vertical growing space and have a bit deeper of a root system than bush beans. So that's a 2-for-1 bonus for me in a smaller space. I can grow them up a cattle panel trellis and then plant other things around them in the beds that I've got the pole beans planted in. They're also super easy to preserve and they give you a really, really long harvest season. I didn't do a ton of pole green beans this year. The bean beetles were really, really bad earlier in the season, but I did do some pole scarlet runner beans in the front. I threw 3 seeds in the ground, I watered them until they sprouted, and then I pretty much just let them go without giving them any special attention all spring and summer. And I ended up with probably about 3 mason jars full of shelled runner beans that I've dried and that I'm storing up for sometime this winter. Next up is Swiss chard. Now, I know that Swiss chard, or chard, whatever you say, is kind of controversial. It is related to beets. So if you're not a huge fan of beets, you may still want to try chard because I think the taste is a little bit different. It's certainly a little bit earthier of a green, but when things like spinach and most lettuces are bolting and going to seed and getting too bitter to eat and it's just way too hot, chard is going to hang in through the worst of the summer heat. Now, I also like to grow chard under things that I'm growing vertically. So this year for my indeterminate pole tomatoes, I grew them up bamboo stakes, and then all below them, I planted a bunch of chard plants. Even when it was super duper hot this summer, they kept putting out large, gorgeous leaves. And this one is actually one that's going to do well in the cold as well. So as you go into your fall garden, don't feel like you need to pull these plants. They're definitely not past their prime until it gets really, really cold. And then you can even cover them to get more life out of them. So if you want to use these as a green in salads, you should snip the leaves and chop them up when they're very young, because as the leaves get larger, they can get a little bit tougher and the taste can get a little bit stronger. So then it's probably a better choice for something like a stir fry, or I like to boil them in chicken broth and garlic and onion just to add as a veggie side to something. Next up, winter squash. So I have not traditionally been a huge squash eater, but again, if there's something that I can grow and that will be shelf stable for many, many months after I pick it, I will learn to like it. And that is winter squash. So specifically, I grew lots of butternut squash this year. I actually just threw down some free seeds I got from our Master Gardener plant swap, and they did great. They took off. I had to end up thinning them out. And sure, squash bugs and borers are issues when you're growing winter squash, but if you can keep them away from your plants long enough to get a harvest, then they can produce pretty prolifically. And since they are sprawling, they do take up a bit of room, but they will shade out the ground around things you may be growing vertically to help conserve some of that water as well. So definitely look into trying some sort of winter squash if you want something that's low maintenance and that you can store over the winter without doing anything crazy like pickling or drying or freezing or any of that. Okay, next up is Malabar spinach. I have been growing this for many years, pretty much as long as I've had a garden. It is a super duper duper heat tolerant spinach alternative. So it's not a true spinach. It's definitely a little bit more like thicker and gelatinous on the leaves, especially as they get larger, than a true spinach is, but it can make a good spinach substitute in a lot of cooked dishes that require spinach. And if you pick those leaves when they're younger and dice them up, much like Swiss chard, they're good in salads in the summer. This one is also a climber. It is really, really pretty. It produces these really cool looking berries that have a super duper highly pigmented dye in them that people actually use to dye things. I would love to try that one day. Haven't gotten around to it yet. But these little berries produce lots and lots of seeds that can actually seed themselves for next year's Malabar spinach crop. So I save Malabar spinach seeds, but honestly, they reseed themselves every year. And so I end up just digging up a little plant and moving it elsewhere, or just kind of letting it grow where it's growing. Next up, we have sunchokes, sometimes referred to as Jerusalem artichokes. They are neither from Jerusalem nor are they actually artichokes, but you'll just hear people refer to them as that. They're actually a type of sunflower, and the part of the plant you eat is the root. They produce these super rich tubers. So they're a lot like potatoes, and a lot of times you can do like a potato soup as a sunchoke soup instead. Now, sunchokes are practically unkillable. So be forewarned, when you put them in the ground, make sure you want them where you have them, because they can grow back from even the tiniest portion of a little tuber. I grew them in containers and raised areas that were separated from the ground before I ended up deciding where to put them in my garden. The tubers will not be as prolific and they won't get as large when you have them in containers usually, but it is worth doing that until you are super sure where you want to put them. They may need a little bit of support because they get quite tall, but this is something that you can grow in areas where you may not be able to grow a lot of other things, and then you can just dig them up. As long as you can dig up the ground, you can dig up a couple sunchokes to take into your kitchen and cook in like December. Now, these are so hard to kill that a lot of people will refer to these as survival crops. So something that you know that you will be able to eat from your yard when everything else is not doing well. They are super resilient in different types of soil, and they're really, really good for you. Just be warned that some people have a harder time digesting them than others, so I will let you look that up yourself to figure out if sunchokes are something that you want to try in your garden. And last but not least, for my favorite heat and drought resistant things to grow, asparagus. Much like sunchokes, they are perennial. Once you plant them and you get them established, they will keep growing back for many, many years. Now, they aren't going to spread like sunchokes do, but asparagus is pretty notorious for reseeding itself if you have a female plant that produces seeds, which I do. We have 2 female plants that we can harvest seeds from. So they will just kind of drop seeds and sprout up other places, but they're not going to spread like a sunchoke will. Asparagus kind of takes up a lot of room, so in a smaller space, we still prioritized it just because we love eating asparagus. It can get kind of expensive at the store, and once the plants are established, you don't have to keep buying them every year, and you get a lot of asparagus. You could just go out and pick it every day for several weeks. You can preserve it, you can eat it fresh, whatever. Something to be aware of though is you do need to let your asparagus fern out, so like grow all the way up and fern and leaf out, just so the root system will be replenished to be able to provide you with plenty of asparagus for next year. So for us in our smaller space, that is a trade-off we are willing to make. We converted like a 15 by 15 patch of grass to an asparagus and sweet potato area a couple years ago, and it has been an excellent decision. Now I'm gonna do a whole video on like planning my 2026 garden, but before we wrap up here, I did just want to touch on a couple things that I am planning to try out in our yard this year. So first of all, I don't usually shop for seeds at Baker Creek. I got these for free. This is a cowpea, otherwise referred to as a black-eyed pea. Black-eyed Susan, black-eyed pea. These are known to be super duper heat and drought tolerant, and also they are, of course, nitrogen fixers in the soil, which we love. I should do a video about different nitrogen fixers in the soil because everyone loves saving money on fertilizer. Next up, I have a red callaloo amaranth. So this is from one of my favorites, Fedco seeds, love them. They're a little pricier, but I think it's worth it to shop from an ethical employee-owned seed company like Fedco. So this gets super duper tall. You can snip the younger leaves like lettuce. It's supposed to be a really nice lettuce replacement when it's getting too hot for your traditional lettuce. They also have these really pretty flower plumes that I am excited about. And speaking of getting too hot for your lettuce, I am trying some Batavian lettuce. I think that's how it's pronounced. These are supposed to be exceptionally heat tolerant, so I am looking forward to seeing if these can actually grow here in July when it's like 100 degrees out, because it would be super awesome to actually have some true lettuce in the middle of the summer. And then two more things I've ordered, but I have not gotten the seeds for yet. I'm growing some Egyptian spinach. That's another spinach replacement that's not a true spinach, but it's supposed to be pretty good. So I have heard some polarizing opinions on it, but I am willing to try anything once, especially if it is easy to grow. And finally, I'm growing some ground cherries. And while ground cherries aren't not true cherries, they are super duper sweet. They grow in like a sprawling bush and they have a husk around them, kind of like tomatillos. And when they're ripe, they drop to the ground and you open them up and you get a little sweet tomato looking cherry thing. They're supposed to be pretty drought tolerant and heavy producers when they are established in the garden, so we'll see how that goes. Okay, so those are some of my favorite climate resilient crops and some of the things that I am excited to grow next year. I'm a little early starting planning for next year, but it is so cold. It's like 17 degrees outside, so planning is what I'm going to be doing. So until my next video, happy planting.